Kurt, it looks very obvious that Trump is now at a point where he cannot wiggle out any of these trials. And I absolutely loathe describing any of this in terms of horse race or sports. But I do think it's important that since he is still basically the leader of the Republican organization, how do you think his current bluster is playing out amongst the rank and file? How do you think it's playing out with state senators and representatives in Georgia? How do you think it's playing out in Congress? Because they're watching their guy, I guess, go down swinging. But at the same time, the mounting legal costs and problems around him seem to make him kind of toxic right now, right?
I think that the broader concern that Republicans across the board should really have is if Donald Trump is spending the bulk of 2024 fighting for his freedom, how in the world is he supposed to be the leader of a party? How is he supposed to do the things that the traditional Republican nominee for president is expected to do on the campaign trail? Be out there vigorously campaigning, be out there elevating the rest of the ticket, talking about those mayor's races, those state assembly races, the congressional races, all the down ballot initiatives. The party apparatuses rely on the top of the ticket to lift everybody up. Well, if Donald Trump is spending a third or a quarter or even half of his time fighting his legal battles and not doing those party building things, that leaves the Republican Party in an incredibly vulnerable state in 2024. So if I were a member of Congress in a contested race, if I were a member of the state legislature in a contested state, I would be very, very worried about next year.
So what we also have right here, Christy Greenberg, and this is massive to me. New York AG says that Trump inflated his net worth by billions at this point, basically pulling all sorts of tricks that you would see like Axe pulling billions and people would be going after him and everything else like that. Here's my first thought. One, the average sort of penalty for, tax fraud and things like that is 3 to 5 years. What do you think could be the real consequences for this particular case? Because we've got sort of political malfeasance on Trump's behalf. We have national security malfeasance. But I think the financial crimes one is one that quite frankly, is just as likely to put him in jail as anything political.
Well, this is a civil fraud case, so it's unclear if jail would be really the penalty for that case. But it could certainly affect his ability to have the Trump organization operate in New York. And that would certainly be a hit to his pocketbook there. So I think there's that business aspect, that financial penalty to him, not only him, to his organization, to the employees of that organization, and to his children, where he could take a substantial hit there.
So I want to ask this because this is something that I think a lot of common people wouldn't know, wouldn't necessarily understand. How common is what Trump did in New York, right? We sort of operate under the assumption that wealthy people sort of inflate their wealth all the time, that they always kind of play at the margins. They say he increases net worth by more than $2 billion. Is that so egregious that that's one of the reasons why he drew attention to himself? Or is that in line with what we've seen in the past with, other big money people who've sort of played games with the system?
Well, it's certainly a very large amount, but I do think part of what you will see at the trial is looking at, in particular, real estate practices and how different properties in New York are, how those valuations happen. And when you're looking at financial statements, I know that New York AG said this is a documents case, but when you're talking about fraud, you're also going to, knowledge, who knew about the financial statements, who knew about the valuations, and who was involved in making those evaluations, what conversations were had. You're going to need witness testimony. So I do think you will see a trial in October where witnesses will speak to those things. And then who relied on or didn't rely on those financial statements in order to, have him obtain those loans. So all of those things are fact-based questions where I don't think they're purely legal. So I don't necessarily see summary judgment, being granted here in full. I do think that these are factual issues that we will see at a trial. And in particular, understanding how those valuations work in New York. Again, these are very large numbers, but the properties are also valued very highly. So I think a lot of that we'll have to wait and see how the testimony comes in at trial.
So, Kurt, we're looking at massive trial in New York, trials in D.C., trials in Georgia. Trials aren't cheap. Trump is spending a lot of money. He's raising a lot of money in order to pay for all the legal bills that he has, all the different lawyers that keep leaving him, all the people who he is not giving assistance to. I want you to sort of talk about, because I think this is a part of it, again, that I think is sort of practical. It's not just horse race. But when you are running for president, 99% of your job at this point is to go out and raise money. And as you mentioned before, as the head of your party or the assumed head of your party, you're also supposed to be raising money for other people. What is the impact on the money spigot right now? I mean, I know there's people out there who will always manage to give money to, say, Clarence Thomas, but there are other mega donors out there. Are they saying, hey, look, I got to give my money to Tim Scott? Or are they saying we're still going to keep dumping money into Trump, even though we know he may be using a lot of this money to just protect himself from prosecution?
Yeah, I think that was one of the more, devastating pieces of reporting that came out in the last month or so was the detail that Trump has spent a lot of money, tens of millions of dollars of what he's raised for his legal defense. And if you're a big GOP donor that usually invests in presidential cycles, I think you need to be asking yourself, is giving millions of dollars to Donald Trump and the RNC, like having that go towards his legal bills instead of going towards the targeted races, building the infrastructure, hiring the field teams that you usually hire to execute elections? Like, is this really the right investment? Or are we going to see some sort of apparatus develop that's going to try to funnel money away from Trump and Trump's control to try to do that party building infrastructure that you usually see in presidential elections? I think it's as this goes on and every financial disclosure period comes out, everyone's going to be looking for the number of how much money Trump has spent on legal fees versus how much he has raised. And as time goes on, I think it's going to have a major turnoff effect for big GOP donors wondering, why am I spending money trying to keep this guy out of jail while the candidates that we actually care about, the issues we care about, aren't being attended to at all?